you start to get enough of these and you start to get the midterms coming along and people feeling like there's a negative coattail effect of Trump and there's going to be a bunch of special elections between now and then. And, you do has this effect. And then you've got the hysteria of, oh my God, he's going to subvert the elections. He's going to call off the presidential election. He's going to send in the troops. Nuclear winter nightmare scenarios were all possible, right? They are all things that could happen. There are nightmare scenarios that could happen, but you can get away with a lot as long as Americans don't die.
All right, welcome back to the TYT. Cenk Uygur here. All right, we're going to do a guest here on optimism. God help us. And curious what Zachary thinks about Venezuela as well. Is Zachary Karabell? He's known as the edgy optimist on Substack. And he wrote a really good piece the other day about what happened in Indiana. With what's happening in Venezuela, it seems a little overshadowed, but we're gonna talk about both of those because I think those are both very important developments, one in a negative direction, the other in a positive direction. Zach, welcome back, brother.
Hi, Cenk.
Yeah, so it's big news today. Let's start with Venezuela. A little tough to be optimistic about that one.
Yeah, look, you and I have talked about this, and hopefully we will keep talking about this. One thing I try to do in a lot of my writing is to remind people that most of what you think is really ugly about America has been really ugly about America. And maybe that depends on who you are. That's either a recipe for, oh my God, we've always been awful and now we're really awful. Or for me, it's a recipe for stop having the Groundhog Day of waking up and being astonished that there's gambling in Casablanca and that we're doing the same things that we've been doing over time with some regularity. Now, it's true that the United States has not staged an extrajudicial, potentially illegal military intervention in a Western Hemisphere country since 1989. I think that's largely accurate. But we did send tens of thousands of troops to Panama to arrest Manuel Noriega. We did send tens of thousands of troops on very questionable grounds to Grenada under Ronald Reagan because we were concerned about whether or not there was a communist government there. And as you know better than anyone, I think, Cenk, that we could spend the next hour talking about all the incidences in Central America from, let's say, the late 1890s or early 1900s to the present. So that's not saying, oh, this is great and fine, but it is a different tenor than, oh my God, we were so wonderful and law-abiding and peace-loving, particularly in our hemisphere, and then suddenly Donald Trump gets elected president and we do this outrageous thing. Or I suppose if you're on the right, we do this wonderful thing. Like you listen to MAGA Land right now, or you listen to Fox, and they're all acting like Trump is amazing. No one's ever done this before. Isn't he incredible? Restoring American strength. Like that's just as ridiculous as we've never done this before. We do this. This is very American. It's as American as apple pie, and apple pie isn't that American. I mean, apples are not indigenous, but separately from that.
All right.
So you get what I'm saying? Like it's not.
I do. So
I'm not sitting here going, wow, isn't this cool that we just sent 200 special forces people into Caracas to abduct the illegitimate leader of a messed up country. But if our new foreign policy is to remove, arrest illegitimate leaders of messed up countries, we're going to be spending a lot of time and money doing that globally.
Yeah. So, fun question for you. Is it fun? We'll find out.
We'll find out.
What's in your opinion better, the old way of doing coups or the new way of doing coups? Because you're unquestionably right.
New and improved.
Yeah, because there's a reason why the countries are called banana republics. It wasn't their fault, it was us. We were doing the invasion on behalf of Dole, a banana company, right? And now we're doing it for oil companies, and we've done that in the past. So, but in the old days, we would hide it, right? And we would pretend that there was a real American interest there for the citizens, et cetera. Now, we just go, oh, we're taking their oil, and we don't like them, and we don't care about the stinking law. We're just gonna violate it and just take it, right? Under the flimsiest of excuses. So I can make a case for either one of them being better, right? But which one do you think is better?
Personally, I prefer the naked and explicit to the opaque and covert. And it's way easier to be hypocritical when you're pretending not to do something you're doing than what you're doing being evident in the light of day for everyone to see. I mean, we can't pretend we didn't do this, and we're not even attempting to pretend we didn't do this, and then we will indeed bear the consequences of having done it. If those consequences are 1,000 flowers of democracy blooming in Venezuela and Caracas once again becoming, this incredibly enticing, flourishing port on the Caribbean, then I suppose we will receive some credit for our albeit odd way of going about it. I think that's unlikely. By the way, even the seizing the oil thing doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, Venezuela, which I think Trump alluded to, has let its oil industry essentially fall apart in a sclerotic mess of cronyism. And so they haven't invested in refining, they haven't invested in production. Their oil production has gone down and down and down year by year, and it's a very heavy, viscous crude oil that requires a lot of energy and a lot of refining to make it usable. So it's not like the most attractive oil in the world. And we would have to spend a lot of money in order to actually make any money on that oil. And we being, I don't know who, Chevron, the US government, and there's no evidence yet, or there's no indication yet that we're about to do any of that.
Although actually, funny enough, right before you came on, Zach, the statement out of the White House is that we might have to pay the oil companies to go and do that exploring of it.
Right.
Right. We already did a coup for you guys. Now we got to pay for it on top. But anyway, I think we've stumbled onto a very unique debate here. I actually don't agree with you, Zach. I think that it was better when we were hiding that we were breaking the law. And the reason for that is because at least it allowed the law to exist, right? And it allowed people to believe that there was an ideal that we could strive towards. Now we kind of have chaos, because now if China goes to take Taiwan, they're gonna be like, what international law? Who are you guys kidding, right? So now it risks chaos even more, even though I like that it's more honest. Yeah, it's hard to argue with more straightforward, but in this case, it does a lot of destruction of international law in the process.
So this is like a debate that's going to go on for the next decade plus, which is, were the latter years of the United States being the self-appointed and in many ways group acknowledged leader of an international order that was set up in 1945, had the time passed in which that was actually better for the world net, even if the United States was hypocritical in its enforcement? And you will certainly hear people around the world saying, we recognize that the United States repeatedly from 1945 violated its own principles, but at least it upheld collective principles in a way that we all benefited from and liked. No one benefited more than those rules than China, right? It benefited from breaking them, but it also benefited from a framework in which it could emerge somewhat peaceably into them. Whether or not, let's say circa 2010, like some mix between the global financial crisis and the Iraq war and the whole domestic maelstrom that surrounds the dual elections of Donald Trump, and that I think anyone would agree with that, whether you're a Donald Trump supporter or not. The degree to which the United States could still be seen as a leader of a system, at least by example, clearly had broken down, and whether or not we really were leading that system, or whether or not multiple countries, because of their own affluence and self-interest, had started to step up, at least regionally. I'm really of the camp that has said that there's a world out there that is more orderly and will in fact be more rules-based, because it's in the interest of a lot of states and middle class who have become more affluent over the past few decades to have that be the case, than needing one hegemon who is flighty and inconsistent and hypocritical, albeit was committed in the United States.
Yeah, I think that it's a super rare case where I go with, let's go with a little bit of obfuscation so we could have international law and order.
Sure.
But okay, one last thing about this. You consistently make the argument, and I generally join you, that things are over the long arc of history get better, right? And there's a lot of ups and downs, and so it doesn't mean things are going to get better in the short term. It means they get better generally in the long term. But in this case, here we are back in the 1950s, right? And we're doing coups in Latin America and South America. So
arguably we're back to the 1980s, but I take the point that we're back to something other than the present.
Yeah, and so were you hopeful at all that we were going to get better? And are you hopeful in the future that we might get better, or no? Whether we're lying or honest, we're going to keep doing this for the rest of the time.
So if we had this conversation when I was younger and more starry-eyed, at least about the world, I would have assumed in the 1990s that the arc of history was toward more peace, more international concord as manifested by the European Union, states coming together, laying down their arms, working together for a more prosperous future. And from that vision to the present, things are clearly quite worse. What I would not have expected was kind of the dual effects of technology, whether that's the web or increasingly the ability of hypercharged technology to unlock material and scientific discoveries. I would not have expected the degree to which the world had become so affluent. And by affluent, I simply mean compared to what it was for all of human history until the present, in terms of far more people having more access to medicine, food, shelter, longer lives, better education, more literacy. I even think declining birth rates recently is a manifest good for most women in the world. I mean, the rights of women in general, the rights of alternate populations like gay people. I mean, the fact is, I would not have expected so many people on the planet to be doing so well at a kind of an individual material level, even as I think things have gotten worse at a collective level. And like that duality, would I rather live in a world where everything was firing on all cylinders and doing better? Sure, I would. I think we all would. But I think that duality is important in that most people live their lives as their lives. They don't live like global tectonic trends that even so are not even evident while we're living them, right? We're all making snap judgments in the present about what we think this all means. And it's all too messy and too noisy for any of us really to know conclusively or for any degree of certainty what all this augurs for the future. Like, I don't know if this is the beginning of the end of the United States as a global leader or a blip along the way, and no one else does either. But I do know that those trends are really powerful, and those aren't going away, right? I mean, there's still a global middle class that is emerging palpably. Why is Maduro illegitimate in Venezuela? He's illegitimate in Venezuela because a lot of 28 million Venezuelans, at least from everything we know in that last election, the majority of whom did not vote for Maduro and did not vote for Chavez policies and voted for something else. Like, that's kind of a positive sign, even if it's a negative outcome. Same thing about what's going on in Iran.
Yeah. I hope we get to a day where America stops doing coups and decides, hey, you know what? Why don't we just buy the bananas for a couple of cents more?
True.
Right? Why don't we just buy the oil from Venezuela instead of just taking it? So I know, revolutionary thought. Okay, yes. But I want to go to local issues as well, because you wrote this really interesting piece about Indiana that you cleverly called Independence, local power, local long traditions, and the limits of Trumpism. So tell us what happened in Indiana and why it gave you some cause for optimism.
After a full court press by the Trump administration to do what Texas had already done in redrawing the congressional maps ahead of the 2026 midterm elections, the Republican-controlled government of Indiana, by a considerable margin, and the Republicans in the Indiana State Senate by a considerable margin, voted not to do that and voted that they were going to keep the maps as was, that doing this in an off year was not the way to go, and that doing this under the kind of virulent pressure from the Trump administration and or internet troll lackey bot land that was flaming. There was one Republican state senator had been in office since the late 1980s, a woman who's a grandmother. She said her grandson was starting to get flamed on his own cell phone about how, all the insults about his grandmother not going along with this redistricting plan, calling her un-American, doxing. And a lot of these Indiana Republicans said this is just not the way, A, we do things here, and B, that we should be doing things as patriotic Americans. And they roundly refused to go along with this plan and voted down the redistricting plan by a considerable margin. And what was astonishing about it was the degree to which they said over and over, we're not going to be bullied. This is not the way to go about this. This is wrong. And it really gives the lie to the popular narrative. And it is a narrative that I feel is constantly reinforced by both elements of the left and certainly elements of the right, that Trump is all powerful, that there is no opposition, that he owns everything, that he just says boo and everybody jumps, or he says jump and everybody says how high. And this was a real example of these people saying, no, we are not going to do this. This is not up to the president. This is not up to Washington. This is a domestic, i.e., this is a state of Indiana decision, and we're going to make the decision as we think we should, in accord with the laws of Indiana. And look, a lot of these senators, the Republican senators who voted against this, would, I am sure, if an election were held tomorrow and Kamala Harris and Donald Trump were once again on the ballot, even with this happening, I think a lot of them would vote for Trump, not because they would want to vote for Trump, but because they would want to vote and would vote and probably will vote Republican. And that is a severe problem of our two-party system, where you're given, at the end of the day, for a presidency at least, you're given two choices, and you either hold your nose and vote for one, or you hold your nose and vote for the other. But I do think it shattered, if not a myth, then a narrative of an all-powerful Donald Trump kind of owning the Republicans lockstep, which may be true for the House Republicans in Congress, but is clearly not true for the entire country.
Zach, my sense of it is that there's a difference on whether the dam is breaking or not, right? So in his first term, when he could single someone out, like Mark Sanford in South Carolina, and say, okay, you said something I didn't like, that's it, I want you eliminated. And I'm running this guy in a primary against you. And he did it 2 or 3 times, then it's manageable. You could exert, all of your pressure in one direction. And then when you do eliminate them, people get scared and then they march in lockstep, right? But it feels like in the second term, the mistake that Trump is making is he's taking out too many fights at once. So he's telling people, okay, I'm gonna knock out that guy, and he's starting to lose track. Then he's talking about knocking out almost all the Republicans in Indiana. Well, that's just too big, to tackle. So it feels like it's not that the strategy is wrong, that it's just that he's applying it wrong because he's drunk on power and he thinks he can intimidate anyone. But if the walls are breached and you're not that popular and you're trying to do it to dozens of people, then I think it becomes ineffective. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're certainly seeing at least some evidence of that, maybe tea leaves, it may be actual evidence, between Marjorie Taylor Greene, who admittedly resigned, probably because she had to or felt she had to. You have the kind of continued Don Bacon and Thomas Massey, who are a bit of outliers on certain issues. But then you have Lauren Boebert in Colorado, who I don't think anyone would describe as anything other than a staunch MAGA Republican, coming out pretty strongly when Trump vetoes this Colorado water bill just because he doesn't like Jared Polis. And she was not, it was not a polite response on her part. She basically said, this is wrong, you shouldn't do this, and I'm going to stand up for the voters of Colorado, i.e. her very Republican rural Colorado district. And you start to get enough of these, and you start to get the midterms coming along, and people feeling like there's a negative coattail effect of Trump, and there's going to be a bunch of special elections between now and then. And you do have this effect. And then you've got the hysteria of, oh my God, he's going to subvert the elections. He's going to call off the presidential election. He's going to send in the troops. He's going to declare the Insurrection Act. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. The Atlantic magazine did a big cover story sort of spinning the nightmare scenarios. I feel like the nightmare scenarios, like we do in foreign policy, like nuclear winter nightmare scenarios, were all possible, right? They are all things that could happen. There are nightmare scenarios that could happen, but I think we also have to honor what is happening more than we honor what we fear is going to happen. And I was roundly criticized in some New Republic article for being an anti-Cassandra, meaning I was somebody who has never adequately pounded the table for just what an existential threat to freedom and democracy Trump is. And I think, and you and I've had these conversations, one of the reasons for that is look at the threat that's happening, not the threat that's might. Look at reality now and not potential then. And it is only in historical hindsight that these things with clarity. And I think people should be a little more cautious about assuming that just because this could happen, that it will.
Yeah, I like this anti-Cassandra title you were given. Maybe we could do a coalition of two on that. And so it's, guys, look, this happened when Trump first took office. It's not that he wasn't going to do outrageous things. We all voted against him, fought against him because we thought he was going to do outrageous things, right? And he did. And like the ICE thing is outrageous. I can name you. In fact, we talk about it all the time. Dozens of things he does.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean he's going to take Greenland next, and it doesn't mean that we're going to have these parade of horribles, etc. Because there are other factors involved. We're not expecting the kindness of Donald Trump's heart. That's not the issue, right?
Correct.
The issue is, yes, but like as I had got in a debate, Zachary, with someone else on the left right near the beginning, and she was convinced that he was going to set up concentration camps for Chinese Americans. I was like, if we got there, a lot of things happened beforehand, right? Like that's, no, just there's so many things Trump is gonna do wrong that you don't have to get to concentration camps for the Chinese. Like let's focus on what's happening now, right? And
there is this huge difference. Again, I will acknowledge, I think anybody should acknowledge that there's a lot that Trump wants to do that would lead us down really, really ugly, problematic paths, much more than we've already been led down. And I think maybe the only surprise of the past year, if you look at this nearly 12 months of the second term or the second season of the Trump show, what is probably most surprising about it is just how many people have been assembled in the administration who kind of echo him in sensibility and tone. It's a little like the island of lost toys, but in a malignant fashion. And I'm surprised there are that many people, who were like bullied in high school. But other than that, much of this remains thwarted ambition and not realized ambition. I know the Trumpies all think they've realized all their ambitions, and I know a lot of the left and a lot of the country believes they have realized all their ambitions. I'm much more struck by how few of those ambitions, other than theatrical, they've achieved, right? Deportations, way lower than it would be if they had done this less brutally and in a more coherent fashion. Way lower than it was under Obama. Way lower than it was under parts of George W. Bush. It's like, they're not even that good at deporting people. They're just good at doing selfies and TikToks of deporting people. We just removed Maduro. Are we going to govern Venezuela? Let's get back to that in a few months. I think the answer on that one is probably no. So, there's a lot they want to do that they seem to be incapable of doing. And I don't know if it's optimistic, but I certainly take a lot of comfort from the fact that they seem at present point either incapable of doing it or halted by the courts and doing a lot of what they otherwise would have wanted to do.
Yeah, totally. Look, last thing, on the courts, I couldn't agree more. They've generally held. Yeah, they did a bunch of rulings we don't agree with, but they have not allowed them to break the law or violate the Constitution in a big way. So I'm relatively satisfied with how much they've kept within the law, especially a Supreme Court that decided Citizens United and other outrageous cases, right? Then Epstein Files was an excellent demonstration of the limits of his power. He did the bullying trick. That's it. If you're want the files released, you're now a rhino and a Democrat and a traitor and stuff. And still the great majority of Republican voters, his own voters, were like, no, we're not any of those things. It's not true. And that's where the wall broke. That's where the dam broke, Epstein Files. And so what I meant by last thing is, so Zachary, I think Venezuela might be the second time the dam breaks. Not now. Now they're on a high. Oh my God, we killed and captured and all that stuff and bombed and look cool and bald eagle and machine guns, right? But if we try to occupy, this thing's going to turn into a nightmare real quick. And then I think that's his Waterloo, and he loses all power, and they can't do those other things that were listed in the parade of horribles.
Yeah, I think if you're going to prognosticate for the short term, it seems more likely that there will be an attempt to do a second coup. If the successor government, which is really the same government without Maduro, proves less pliant, whether or not the United States attempts to say, well, we don't like the next person, so we'll just try to find another person. before you actually have troops there. Because, it's interesting. Trump has had this kind of spidey sense of you can get away with a lot as long as Americans don't die. And he seems to get that intuitively, because nothing that he's done in either of his terms have really jeopardized American soldiers, which is telling, right? Now, never say never, and you can get drunk on power, and he kind of goes, we can do anything. And you're right, that'll be the Waterloo, right? Forgetting his own clearly digested lesson. But to date, that's a lesson, or that's almost a mantra, whether it's explicit or not, that he's lived by.
Yep. And he has gotten a little bit lucky that nobody got hurt in Iran and Venezuela and all the bombings, right? But you can't control Venezuela from the outside. So either he's going to get embarrassed and then going to have to, basically run away, or he's going to get involved in an occupation that's going to be his Waterloo. So I don't think that there's a lot of good options out there for him now that he started this mess. But we'll see.
Correct.
All right, Zachary Karabell, Edgy Optimist on Substack. Make sure you're checking it out. Zach, we appreciate you, brother.
Thank you.
All right, guys. I will do a bonus episode for you all. I do an interesting one about how the difference between covering the Iraq War before it began and as it began versus covering this war in Venezuela. I'll tell you all about that. If you're a member, hit the join button below on YouTube or tyt.com/join, and I'll see you guys in a minute.